The clock on the wall says 3 in the morning, and the silence in this room is starting to feel like a weight. You spend enough time looking into these cases, and the silence stops being peaceful. It starts to feel like a predator holding its breath. We are looking at the High Sierras today, a place of jagged granite teeth and meadows that look like paradise but feel like a graveyard. People go into these mountains expecting a challenge. They bring the best gear and thousands of hours of experience. They think they know the rules of the woods. But the woods do not have rules. They have appetites. The air at 10,000 feet is thin and cold, and it tastes like old pennies. It is a place where the sun feels too close and the shadows feel too deep. In October of 1991, the High Sierras were already starting to tighten their grip. The wind hums through the lodgepole pines with a sound like a low human moan. This is where Terrence Fitzgerald decided to spend his final hours of freedom. He was not a novice. He was a man who understood the terrain. He knew the granite. He knew how to read the clouds. But something in the mountains was reading him too. Terrence was hunting with his friends. They were a tight group. They stayed within sight or sound of each other for most of the morning. Then the fog rolled in. It was not a normal mountain mist. It was thick and heavy, and it smelled like wet stone and ozone. One minute his partner could see the orange of Terrence's vest through the trees. The next minute there was only a wall of grey. No shout. No sound of a struggle. Just a sudden and absolute erasure. When you lose someone in the high country, you learn very quickly how small you are. The search parties arrived within 12 hours. They had bloodhounds. They had helicopters with thermal imaging that could pick up the heat signature of a field mouse from 1,000 feet in the air. They found nothing. The dogs took one sniff at the last place Terrence was seen, and they did not bark. They did not pull on their leashes. They sat down and they whimpered. They looked at the trees as if something was standing there that the humans could not see. The investigators looked at the ground for tracks. In the High Sierras, the ground is a mix of shale and soft pine needles. If a man walks through there, he leaves a story behind. He leaves broken twigs and scuffed dirt. But for Terrence, there was no story. It was as if he had been lifted directly off the surface of the earth. No footprints led away from his last known position. No gear was dropped. He simply ceased to exist in our physical dimension. 3 days into the search, the weather turned. A storm blew in that dropped 2 feet of snow in 6 hours. The search was called off. The mountains went white and silent. The investigators went home to their warm beds, but they did not sleep. You do not sleep well when you realize that a grown man can vanish in the time it takes to blink an eye. Months later, when the snow finally melted, the searchers went back. They expected to find a body. They expected to find a tragic scene of a man who got lost and succumbed to the elements. What they found instead defies every law of logic we pretend to live by. They found his gear. His rifle was leaning against a tree 5 miles from where he disappeared. It was clean. It was not rusted. It looked like he had just set it there to tie his shoe. But there were no shoe prints. Further up the ridge, they found his boots. They were tucked neatly under a rock overhang. The laces were still tied. This is a pattern we see over and over again in these cases. The removal of footwear in sub-zero temperatures. Hypoxia can cause paradoxical undressing, but this was different. This was not the frantic stripping of a dying man. This was organized. It was deliberate. It was as if he had been asked to take them off before being taken somewhere else. The most disturbing part of the Fitzgerald case is the location of the remains. His bones were eventually found nearly 10 miles away in a drainage pipe that had been searched multiple times during the initial investigation. To get there, he would have had to cross 2 mountain passes and a river that was swollen with runoff. He would have had to do it barefoot. In the dark, while a blizzard was screaming across the peaks. It is physically impossible for a human being to survive that trek without shoes. And yet, there he was. I have spent years looking at these maps. I have pins in my office for every person who has vanished in the national parks under these specific circumstances. You start to see the clusters. You start to see the way the disappearances happen near boulder fields and high-elevation water sources. There is a geometry to it that feels artificial. It feels like a trap designed by something that has been hunting us since the dawn of time. People ask me why I do this. Why I spend my nights staring into the abyss of these reports. It is because the official explanations are a lie. They tell you he got lost. They tell you he had a mental break. They tell you the wind moved the body. But the wind does not untie boots and tuck them under a rock. The wind does not carry a man 10 miles over a mountain range without leaving a single drop of blood on the stones. There is a silence in the high Sierras that is not natural. It is a silence that happens right before the world shifts. If you are out there and the birds stop singing and the wind drops to nothing and the air starts to taste like copper, you need to run. Do not look back. Do not stop to pick up your gear. Just run until you see the lights of a city. Because once the mountain decides it wants you, there is no force on this earth that can bring you back. Terrence Fitzgerald is just one name on a list that is growing every year. These are not accidents. These are not statistics. These are a series of events that suggest we are not the top of the food chain when we step off the pavement. We are guests in a house that does not want us there. And sometimes the house decides to keep a souvenir. The case remains unresolved. The coroner could not determine a cause of death. The bones showed no signs of predation. No tooth marks from bears or mountain lions. No fractures from a fall. Just bleached, white calcium resting in a place it should never have been. We see this in the Rocky Mountains. We see it in the Cascades. We see it in the deep woods of the Northeast. A man walks into the trees and the trees close behind him. Tonight, when you go to bed, listen to the wind against your window. Think about the thousands of square miles of wilderness where no human foot has stepped in a century. Think about the things that might be living in the spaces between the trees. The things that do not use fire. The things that do not need light to see you. We like to think we have conquered the wild. We have satellites and cell phones and GPS. But those things are just toys. They are plastic and glass, and they fail the moment the mountain decides to turn off the lights. Terrence had everything he needed to survive, except for an explanation for what was waiting for him in the fog. Be careful out there. Stay on the trail. Keep your friends in sight. And if you feel like you are being watched, you probably are. The mountains are old, and they have long memories. And they are always hungry for something new. This has been the Missing 411 podcast. Sleep well if you can. But keep the lights on. The darkness is a lot closer than you think. The cabinets in this room are filled with names that nobody wants to remember. Folders so thin, they feel like a mockery of the lives they represent. Each one a story that ended in a question mark. People ask me why I do this. Why I spend my nights staring at topographical maps until the contour lines start to look like veins. It is because the truth is not in the official reports. The truth is in the things they leave out. They leave out the smell of ozone when there are no clouds. They leave out the way the search dogs start to whine and pull at their leashes toward the car instead of the woods. They leave out the fact that the clothing is almost always found in a state that defies logic. Let us look at a case from the deep timber of the Cascades. July of 1998. A man named Aaron Vogel, 42 years old. A marathon runner with a heart like a diesel engine and a mind like a compass. He was not a novice who bought his gear at a shopping mall the day before. He knew the difference between a game trail and a hiking path. He knew how to read the lean of the trees and the color of the moss. He stepped away from his family campsite to gather a few handfuls of dry kindling. Just 50 yards from where his wife was boiling water for tea, they could hear him whistling a tune. A simple melody that echoed off the granite walls. And then the whistling stopped. It did not fade away as he walked further into the brush. It did not end with a shout for help or the sound of a struggle. It just cut off like a wire being snipped by a pair of rusty shears. His wife called his name. She waited 5 minutes and called again. Then 10 minutes. By the time 20 minutes had passed, the woods had become something else. The light had turned into a bruised gold color that felt heavy on the skin. She said, the air suddenly tasted like she had a mouthful of old pennies. That sharp metallic tang of copper that sits at the back of the throat and tells your brain that something is fundamentally wrong with the atmosphere. The search began within 2 hours. Local sheriff deputies. Mountain rescue teams. Men who had spent 30 years tracking elk through the thickest laurel and devil's club. They brought in helicopters, equipped with thermal imaging cameras that can spot the heat signature of a squirrel from 1,000 feet up. They found nothing. For 6 days, they combed a 5-mile radius with the kind of intensity you usually reserve for a crime scene. And then on the 7th day, a searcher found Aaron S. spectacles. They were sitting on a mossy stump in the middle of a clearing. The glasses were folded neatly, the temples tucked in just so. There was not a scratch on the lenses. Not a speck of forest duff or pine resin on the glass. They were sitting in a place that had been walked over by at least 40 searchers and 2 bloodhounds over the previous 48 hours. You do not miss a pair of wire-rimmed glasses sitting on a dark green stump in the sunlight. You just do not. Those glasses were not there on Tuesday. And they were not there on Wednesday. They were placed there sometime on Thursday morning like a calling card. Or a taunt. 2 days later, they found the rest of him. He was 3 miles away from the spectacles. At the very top of a jagged rock slide that would have taken a professional rock climber with ropes and harness hours to navigate. He was lying face up. His skin was as pale as bleached bone. But there were no bruises from a fall. His feet were bare. The soles of his feet were soft and pink and clean. If you walk 10 feet in those woods without boots, your skin is shredded by the volcanic rock and the thorns. Aaron had supposedly traveled 3 miles over the roughest terrain in the county, and his feet looked like he had just stepped out of a bathtub. His boots were never found. His shirt was found 2 miles in the opposite direction from the body. It had been folded into a perfect square and tucked inside the hollow of a cedar tree. The coroner listed the cause of death as exposure. In the middle of a July heatwave, where the temperature never dropped below 65 degrees, even at the highest elevations, they used the term paradoxical undressing to explain the shirt. It is a convenient phrase used by men in suits to explain away the unexplainable. But it does not explain the folding. It does not explain the clean feet. And it certainly does not explain how a man gets to the top of a cliff that no human could climb without equipment. We see this pattern repeating like a heartbeat in the dark. The spectacles on the stump in the Cascades. The boots tucked under a rock in the Sierras. The backpack found hanging from a branch 20 feet in the air in the Adirondacks. It is as if whatever is taking these people is interested in the objects we carry. The tools we think make us superior to the wild. It strips us of our leather and our nylon and our glass until we are just meat and bone again. Just another animal lost in the basement of the world. There is a specific kind of silence that searchers talk about in hushed tones over campfires. They call it the zone of silence. It is a pocket of the woods where the physics of sound seem to break down. You can scream at the top of your lungs and the sound does not travel 10 feet. It feels like the trees are absorbing the vibration before it can leave your throat. When you hit that silence and the copper taste fills your mouth, you have crossed a threshold. You are no longer in the world of roads and clocks and cell phone towers. You are in the house of something that has been here since the glaciers retreated. Aaron Vogel was not the first. And he was not the last. Every year the list gets longer. Every year a few more people step off the paved path to look at a flower or pick up a stick, and they simply cease to exist in the way we understand existence. The authorities will tell you it is the terrain. They will tell you it is the weather. They will tell you the human mind is fragile and prone to breaking under stress. But they will not tell you why the dogs refuse to track. They will not tell you why the clothes are folded. And they will not tell you why the silence is growing. Be careful when you go out there. The woods are not a park. They are not a playground. They are an ancient, indifferent, and hungry machine. If the birds stop singing and the air turns to metal, do not wait to see what is coming. Just run. Keep the lights on tonight, because the trees are a lot closer than you think, and they have been watching you for a very long time. This has been the Missing 411 podcast. Sleep well if you can.